Hey there, Chris.
How's it going, Chris?
I'm doing just fine. We finally got everything set up for our little curmudgeon talk to share with everybody. So I got to thank you for your patience because I was really excited you were willing to do this today. And glad you're around. I know you're pretty busy.
That's all good. So, what do you think about that Wilcock Drake interview?
Well, it was really interesting. You know, I've had a lot of harsh things to say about Wilcock in the past, and it's just basically I think he's very gifted at what he does. But you know, when I listened to the Drake interview, I was really impressed with the information coming out, and it was very hopeful information, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very good interview as well. I mean, he did a great job. You know, there were several concerns in the interview that I had in terms of sticking to subject matter, but at the same time, I thought it was really hopeful in terms of what was presented. Now, whether that's true or not remains to be seen.
Well, you know, just for those people, in case they're not familiar with what the information was, why don't we go through it real briefly about what was actually discussed, who Drake was. Who did you gather from that interview that Drake was?
I gathered that, well, he's ex-military. He's somebody that had a conversation in the past, a private, secret conversation with some other higher-end military people who discussed with him the idea that as a patriotic move for the country, a system should be set up in order to condense the stronghold of the people's power in the United States and have the military as a watchdog in service.
But there was a real fear of the posse comitatus, if I'm not mistaken, that the military didn't want to be seen as overstepping their constitutional role and did not want to be seen as a military coup, right?
Right. So basically what happened is that they put out there, apparently for several years, that somebody from the public, people from the public had to step up in order to create documents which would legally allow this to happen. And apparently, according to them, this actually did occur. And so they are able to step in with the public interest in mind.
See, now this is where I'm confused because I heard about this many years ago, this whole ship of state filing papers with The Hague and how much water that really was, you know, holding in a sense of, was this legitimate? And Drake apparently made a phone call to a radio show when he thought somebody was giving out dangerous information about personal sovereignty and thought you're going to get these people thrown in prison telling them this stuff. And then he gave out the blueprint of how to set yourself up as a sovereign, and apparently he said one person really did it, and the military somehow got wind of it very quickly, and they said, hey, can you do it again? And that's how Drake got brought into it because it was really his information. He said, hey, I did that phone call, and apparently, I don't know, he didn't say, as far as I could tell, how many states have done this, but apparently it's been a number of states who set up their sovereignty based on the Constitution, and depending on when they were brought into the Union, they have different rules, and they apparently have done this for a lot of the states now.
Well, he also mentioned that somewhere in about 1979 that he was basically issued into a conversation where he was given a 5-inch thick document from people in the military saying that basically they had a plan that they were working on to enact.
Right, because they saw this going south way back then.
Right, exactly. Nixon actually was when he brought up that they were really concerned about what Nixon was doing in terms of trying to become a dictator, and from there on out, they started making plans in terms of trying to create a situation where they could legally uphold the sovereignty of the United States and be able to, as military, serve the people rather than the chief, which is the President of the United States. Right. And so they really they wanted these documents so that they could legally do it, so that they were legally binding. And apparently that has happened. And so there was a plan that is in place, which includes arresting a bunch of the powers that be, the cabal, and tossing them into FEMA camps, into jail.
Right.
Now, they also mentioned that the way that this plan was orchestrated, or is, you know, in their imminent, they said that this is something that is going to happen, that the way this plan was going to be flushed out was so that it didn't belay anything but commerce in terms of goods and services.
Right.
And
they said you'd need to basically have a 1 month supply of food set aside to get through an initial upheaval of what's happening. And they wanted to make sure that everybody was realizing the military wasn't taking over the country. They were assisting the marshals in arresting these people. But that was really strange to me that they're acting like this is just going to go so smoothly and nothing bad's going to happen. And that brought me back to some posts I had made over on the forum about Bezmenov, who, you know, was a defector in the 70s to the United States from Russia. And he shared what he said was the plan to take over the world. And it wasn't just America. It was a Marxist plan of how to bring it, destabilize a country, demoralize it, destabilize it, then bring in a crisis, and then once the crisis period was over in 6 weeks to begin normalization. And it's been happening all over the world. And the Soviets actually, he said, the plan in America was more successful than they had ever dreamed of it being. And so, you're familiar with Bezmenov, right?
Yeah, I am. I saw that interview, actually, I think it was several years ago. Mm-hmm. And, I mean, I don't necessarily... He
warned us in the 80s. He warned us way long ago about what was coming.
Right. And he also commented that they were amazed at how easy it was.
Right.
To de-educate and re-educate the masses of the United States.
Right. And then he said it takes 15 to 20 years to turn it around. So once they've got it done, they know they've got a good 15 years before anything can begin to unravel where we're headed. And that, as a matter of fact, the re-education is so successful that you could literally take somebody, show them what was going to happen, let them see what true Marxist communist lifestyle really is. It's not this utopia everybody pretends it is. He lived it. He said, you know, anybody who disagrees with the power structure is thrown into a concentration camp, gulag, if they're lucky. If they're not, they're dead. And he said, as soon as it comes into power after the crisis stage, the first ones to die are the people who push the program in to begin with, people who are very left-leaning, liberal, what we consider liberal in the United States, who believe in this utopian world, which is a wonderful idea, but it's just not reality under the Marxist system. And they're the first ones, he said, that will be killed. He put it out plain as can be.
Right. Now in the Drake interview, okay, they mentioned that they were going to put people into positions of power, but only temporarily.
Right.
And he said that several times.
It'd be a volunteer thing because they wouldn't want the country to collapse. But I'm sorry, how do you know whoever volunteers isn't going to, stab you in the back?
Well, here's the thing, is that the system's already set up so that psychopaths can run it rather easily. So that's not quite working. So if you put people into a system that's already flawed, basically the entire system needs to be revamped. On top of which, the idea of commerce stopping. Now, having been someone that lived through Hurricane Katrina, I happen to know what that does to a society.
Right.
And,
people panic. People panic big time.
People will panic. And that's just the fact right there. I mean, there will be riotous.
Well, let's look at it this way,
that
Chris.
Will go out and break into the stores and grab whatever they can, because that's what they are feeling they must do.
Right, and whether or not this military assistance happens or not, the way the country's going, it looks like we're going to have some pretty rough economic times. That we're going to have crisis one way or another. Now, for people to truly understand. What happens, and we just briefly went over it, was we had the demoralization of society, the breakdown of the family, the educational system taken over, and we have more and more government programs. Government's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, so everybody's dependent on the government. We don't have a lot of independence. The government's made sure it's harder and harder to create a business, to become the independent American and live your life's dream. And now we have the destabilization, which has come into play, and we have gas going up, more and more people losing their homes. We have tent cities, we have Occupy movement, we have the Tea Party movement. And he said, when the crisis hits, it takes 6 weeks, and we're talking about a violent crisis. Now, whether or not the military steps in or not, don't you think we're possibly heading it? It only takes a little. We got the Trayvon Martin situation in Florida. That's a race issue ready to blow up in our faces any time now.
Well, these are created race issues as
right.
well.
Exactly.
These are things that have been set up so that, people feel demoralized, so that people feel that they have to choose one side or another. This is all a very complex and very interesting psychological system that's put out there. Now, my question is this military, and I'm just going to call it a cabal right now because I'm not sure what it is.
Right.
Do they actually have the best interests of the people of the United States at heart, or is this another subterfuge? And that's a huge question.
Well, you have the Oath Keepers, and I think a lot of people are wondering who is going to be on our side. Is Blackwater going to be called in a crisis if the military steps up? I mean, I've always heard that whoever's in the leadership of the military now is a sociopath. They're basically one of the boys. And what, are they just going to suddenly turn patriotic?
Well, it's interesting because they said that the people who would make the arrests we're actually the military were going to stand behind the marshals, and the marshals were basically going to have the police, the domestic police force, actually be the ones making the arrests.
Right, and yet all we see is the fact that who appoints the marshals, how do you get into that position, and then the police force, every day, I know lots of cops. I worked with police for 5 years professionally, and I know a lot of really good cops, but there's a lot of bad videos out there now showing a lot of abuse of civil rights, of just doing whatever the heck they want to do. And people are afraid of the police today. They aren't viewed as your friend. And I think that upsets a lot of officers who truly do want to help protect and serve their community. But come on, when 80-year-old women are being drugged out of cars and tasered and killed.
Well, I mean, people are people, which means they're all different. This entire plan is based on the premise that there's unification. And
thank you for bringing that up, because that is a big part of this plan.
There's not unification in the military. There's not unification with the marshals, and
there's not unification anywhere.
Exactly. So, and there's not going to be unification in terms of how people are going to react to this in the United States as well. And that concerns me a great deal because I don't see how this plan of, 5 inches thick or not is addressing these issues, because those issues were not addressed during the interview whatsoever. And that's something that really needs to be looked at. In New Orleans, which, and I happen to be in New Orleans right now, visiting my old hometown, is still recovering what happened.
I was there a few years ago, and half the businesses were still covered in blue tarps, and half the houses were boarded up. What's it look like now there? How long has it been? How many years has it been? And it's looking
pretty good, actually. And strangely enough, I am going to be going on a helicopter ride to
awesome.
actually get an air view of this, and I'll be taking some video of that, as well as legitimate, real video of what's going on in the Gulf. So I'm pretty excited about getting into that helicopter and actually being able to see it for myself. Driving around, things really seem to be picking up here. I have to say that most of it, if not 85 to 90% of it, is due to the people that live here and not due to the help that never happened.
Right.
The missing, $29 million, which is basically, just putting a Band-Aid on a pimple.
Right.
In order to, help these people out. They never really got the help they needed. And so it was only through their own backbones and, courage that they were able to pull this town back together again.
Now, did you get out before the you were there for how long after Katrina hit, and when did you end up leaving?
I actually left right before because I had to go to Colorado on business, and I looked at the Weather Channel and realized I wasn't going back. And then it was only about 3 weeks after the hurricane, when they had just allowed people to come back in, that I came back. And that was, now when we're talking about the unraveling of a society, okay, and, and they're talking about, closing down borders, taking satellites out, all kinds of things. And they had some good reasons that they put forward to that. However, that also belays our ability to contact people from the outside world,
right,
so people know what's really going on here.
That's what I want to ask you about, because
also,
when you were there, what did you see in the aftermath? What was running, what wasn't running? Who did you...
Nothing was running. Things were blowing up, literally blowing up due to gas line leaks. There were people here from the National Guard that were literally in tears because they were not allowed to physically assist anybody. They were just there basically to have a presence, but they were not allowed to actually lift a hand up and help an old lady pull a mattress out of her house.
Why not?
This was the rules they were given. These people were in tears.
That's insane. That's insane.
Now, the other thing that really was frightening was seeing the military presence. Okay, hearing the sniper rifles with Blackwater at night. That was nice.
That's what I was going to bring up, because I have something to share with you in that area.
And the other part of that situation was, George Bush did an address here. And when he came into town, they actually put down fake grass in the park. Nothing would grow in the park because it was all toxic.
Right.
They put down fake grass. They put a podium up. They, made it look like everything was fine. They actually put flowers in the flower boxes. Now, all these grasses and flowers were dead within a week.
Right.
But that was after he had already left.
Yeah.
And, oh, yes, we're going to build up New Orleans and yada, yada, yada. Well, I'm so sorry. That was grossly overstated, and that was just nothing but propaganda.
Well, the thing you brought up, though, that the Blackwater issue, we have a lot of Blackwater people are employed to act as the military or hired by the government, and they play the security role. I actually talked to a guy. Now, I didn't get to see his credentials. He claimed to be Blackwater, and they were told to shoot on sight anybody looting. And he said they were just, he killed a lot of people, supposedly, that, were just stealing basic stuff. And I say just stealing. Stealing's wrong. And, they were stealing TVs. What the hell somebody needs with a TV in the middle of a flood, exactly. I don't know. But
even the cops were looting, okay? And that was seen as well.
But if Blackwater's willing to shoot people stealing a TV set, what kind of people? And these are Americans, people. These aren't supposedly some foreigners brought in. These are Americans who are being paid, who are claiming. And I've heard other side stories about people being shot, and there's just no checks and balances. If there's a crisis, and we go back to the Drake interview, and there's looting, and a segment of the population goes crazy.
Well, because, the real story is that, like I said before, everyone's different. And so we're going to have some people who are going to be very calm during this situation and be watching to see who is getting arrested. Hopefully the right people, but how do we know when
exactly.
It's going to be a propaganda system that's going to be set up on the television, right? They've already pre-recorded, apparently.
Well, how do you know that once they're arrested, they're not driven out of state and just let go and get on a plane? How do you know it's not eyewash?
We don't know. That's basically it. We don't know. So that is an issue. It's going to be really interesting to see how most of the people behave, okay? Because most people they've been watching television. They've got fear on their minds. And so with fear comes a response. And that's a very delicate situation that needs to be looked at.
Well, and then let's go into the third stage here. If you're in a crisis mode, how hard is it for one group, because I think right now we have competing groups. I don't know what you think, but I think we have competing groups of who's going to control the crisis. And people are waking up that, we've got a serious situation on our hands. The dollar is going to collapse. We were told not to look at the stock market, look at derivatives. That was brought up in the Drake interview, but it's been said by others like Gerald Celente. And, when everything collapses and you can't buy anything and you're looking at just trying to survive and do what you need to do for your family, in a crisis mode.
From personal experience, it sucks. And people behave each according to their own gifts. And, some people are more gifted than others.
Well, and I'm not going to pull any punches here. Certain segments of society are more violent than other segments, and there are certain groups that'll gather together. And if they think that they can take something, they want from those who are not standing together, and this is a terrible idea. What are we talking about here? Americans fighting each other for scraps if things start to fall apart. But the whole idea is the military is going to be there to keep order. What does order mean? What's the definition of order? And then you've got David Wilcock interviewing this guy, and I'm wondering how truthful any of this is, because I don't trust Wilcock. I think he's a great internet marketer. I think he's a very good researcher.
He's a very talented researcher. He's a flawed human being, in my opinion, and I'm not pulling punches here either. But we're all human beings. We all have flaws. He's
okay,
not.
You're being a lot nicer than I am, Chris, because quite frankly, I can't share that interview with a whole lot of people who are not into the whole alternative media situation and listen to a bunch of different weird stuff.
Oh, we are in complete agreement about that. Okay.
And we got David Wilcock, who claims he's the reincarnation of Edgar Cayce. Okay, there we lose 70% of the people who don't believe in any of that stuff. And then we've got him, talking about the David Icke type stuff, the lizards and the aliens. They had a 2.5-hour interview that should have stopped right at 2.5 hours. He should have said, "Thank you for your time. Thank you for your information. This is David Wilcock. I feel very strong about this stuff. I have a very spiritual take on this. If you'd like my information on where I think things are going, please visit my website. I've got some books out." And he should have left it there. Instead, they went into a half an hour of talking about all this woo-woo crap, and all of a sudden, I'm like, well, great. How am I supposed to share this interview with, a state senator I know? How am I supposed to share this interview with some police officers I know? They're gonna get through 2.5 hours, and then they're gonna hear Drake and DW, David Wilcock, go into this stuff that, whether it's true or not, it sounds weird as hell.
Well, this begs us to ask the question, and it's a really important question. Why did they choose David Wilcock? Knowing his persona, knowing his ego, knowing the type of person that he is, and what he does, why would they choose Wilcock? Now,
do they really think we're stupid enough to think that they just sort of put their finger in the air and said, "I want to talk to this guy," without investigating? They plan stuff. We're not stupid. I feel like they're treating us like we're stupid.
There are other people in the alternative community who would have had much more legitimacy. Richard Dolan, for one.
He would have been excellent.
He would have been fantastic, even though he's all about UFOs. He would have been all about keeping the integrity of the conversation, because that's what he does. And I just don't understand why choose Wilcock.
David says he didn't have a choice in this. He was the one picked, and he knows everybody's been very hard on him about his interview with Carrie Cassidy when he went on his crying spree, and everybody says, well, he was scared, and he's this and he's this, but he's put all these books out about higher self, and this is just a physical experience. We're spiritual beings. We're eternal. And he didn't appear to live up to that. So now it looks like to me he's had 2 interviews where he's looking like he's trying to recover his credibility. And, it's just, why bring him into it? And here's the other point. Anybody who knows anything about COINTEL, counterintelligence, knows that you bring out a subject. If there's a truth being talked about online, if there's a truth being talked about amongst the people, that if you want to discredit that truth, you to have another person come out who's talking about the same things, and then they bring in some really weird stuff, and people start to tune it out, and they say, oh, give me a break. You want me to believe there's lizards running around? Exactly. Reptilians, the Galactic Federation of Light.
And that's not to say that these things are true or not.
Right, but
what I'm saying is that it takes away the credibility of the conversation, because this is a conversation that they admittedly said they wanted everyone to hear. And that means everyone, not just the 15% of the people that are interested in spiritual issues or issues about UFOs or who are in the alternative community, but the other 85% of the people who are actually, you know,
they're going to be affected too. If it's true, they're going to be affected, and they need to know, but they're not going to take it seriously listening to this other crap.
And that's, you know, so what is this? All right? So if we follow that line of logic, all right, is this a legitimate conversation that Drake and Wilcock had, or isn't it? And I think we really need to question that.
Well, here's the other thing, Kristen. We have to look at the other thing. There's a lot of stuff happening that whether or not Drake was right or not, there is a crisis brewing in this country and the world. And so who's going to control the message? And if it's going to be one side or the other, like you said, why pick David Wilcock, who's more of a fringe author who might or might not be putting out really important stuff?
Why not choose Chris Hedges?
You know, it really does beg the question, why David Wilcock? And I would love to see somebody else interview Drake and not go into this woo-woo stuff, because he sounded very, very, passionate, very truthful. He sounded like he was talking from his experience. He didn't sound like he was trying to come up with answers like, you know, some people who claim to be whistleblowers. He sounded like he answered everything on the dot when it was asked. He could go back through it. He could go back over it. He didn't
he seemed to know what he was talking about too.
Exactly.
You know, and that's why there is a hopefulness to this message. But you know, there are so many concerns that need to be addressed about it. Huge amounts of concerns, and it would be of a benefit for this entire, if this is a movement that is a legitimate one, that they choose someone else for their spokesperson, number one, and number two, actually, yeah, right, you know, they actually start addressing, really realistically addressing these issues of what is going to happen in terms of discord that's going to happen in this country when this happens. This is not, and they're putting it out there as though it's going to be, you know what, you're going to need to stock up on food, but basically everything else is going to be fine. Now,
but who really wants the upheaval? Nothing happens politically that's not planned. Nothing. There is no event that happens that one side or both sides, you know, the little puppet masters in the world, aren't setting up. And who has been saying that they're going to launch the most spectacular peace movement? They're going to look like they're, you know, right with the rest of the world, and they're going to then crush America with an iron fist. That was the Russians. The Russians have been the Marxist theology, the re-education of the people. You look at the 10 planks of Marxism, you look at the plans that Bezmenov shared, the steps to take over a country, and they don't want an outright gun-shooting battle. They wanted a silent war, and we've been at a silent war, Chris, for decades now, and they've said that it was more successful than they could have imagined their wildest dreams, and now we're getting ready to go into crisis. And what happens in these countries? What is the result of the crisis? Are we getting ready to be attacked? The Russians have been building up their arms, and the Chinese have been building up their arms. Well, now we're talking about shrinking our military. And granted, we don't need to be in 700 bases around the world, but damn it, we don't need to be caught with our pants down to be attacked either.
There needs to be a balance, and also, you know, of course, this gets into a balance of diplomacy, which has not been happening.
The only idea of diplomacy for them is to agree with us. Where's diplomacy with a Marxist?
This is the thing too, though. I mean, you know, as we all know, okay, now is this a whole thing that is being orchestrated through the Marxists in order to take over the entire world, which I think it is, you know, or are these different factions, you know, working independently? Now, if it is a whole cabal, which is trying to take over the world, which to me seems fairly obvious, then how is a very independent faction, okay, that is very small in comparison to this worldwide effort, going to actually retake the United States?
And this is an important point you bring up, Chris, because here, let's talk about this. You and I have talked about this in the past, about the fact that what is the real outcome of these interviews, of these forums? Are we really changing the world, or are we being distracted? Because Bezmenov brought up the fact, and people, if you want to go find out about Bezmenov, I have a website. There's Project Avalon. It has it on there as well. But on my website, which is Unified Serenity at WordPress.com, there's a whole section on the Soviet aspect and what they do in the silent takeover, and they said they love the fact in the 60s and 70s, everybody going over to India to meet with these gurus, and they would start navel gazing and tuning out the world and focusing on their spirituality. And yes, there's a truth to that and growing spiritually. However, you can't ignore reality. You know, if a hurricane is coming, it doesn't do you a lot of good to sit there in a lotus position while your kids are being blown 100 yards away and impaled on stuff. You got to get off your ass and do something in reality. And unfortunately, a lot of people, he said the Russians were really interested in this whole new agey kind of religion of tuning out and we're all one and believing in this stuff, you know, kind of Christian name it and claim it theology, as if you just focus on love and light, everything's positive. Well, not if there's an asshole next to you who's a sociopath who's determined to rule the world and kill anybody who doesn't agree with them.
Well, so, you know, the fact of the matter is, no matter how much you meditate, it's not going to stop a bullet.
Right, and also, but if you're an intellectual, and you know the people that we associate with on the forums, and there's lots of forums out there. We could, everybody, I mean, I see half the same people on every forum, but we're all intellectuals. We all read this stuff. We all argue. Some people agree with me. Some people hate me. You know how it goes, Chris.
Yeah, I do indeed.
And so then we're all busy on these forums, but are we making a bit of difference? And so then with this news coming out with Drake, does that just fly in with the same idea that it's just another thing as the people are ramping up and realizing the shit's about to hit the fan? Are we just then being told to just wait for the military to do this so we don't have to do anything, and it's another means to sideline us?
Well, this is why it's really important. Okay, I think that, and I'm going to be kind of proactive here. If this goes down, okay, so here's the thesis. If this goes down, then how do people react? Now, even if the satellites are taken out, we still have the ability to create media. And self-created media is very important. I would really like to see people recording what they see happening. And, you know, being
but
able
how
to
safe do you, honestly, Chris, I don't feel that. I'm usually fairly optimistic about, I mean, I think we're all eternal beings, but when the crap hits the fan, there's a segment of society who is looking forward to this chaos. There is a whole anarchy movement, and when there's no cops around, what do you think's going to happen, honestly?
Well, I've seen it. You know, it's insane. It's absolutely insane.
And who suffers the most in that situation?
Everybody suffers. You can't even say that one person suffers more than another. It basically levels out the ground in terms of...
Don't you think the elderly were just free pickings for people? Don't you think that women were definitely on the short end of the stick during that situation, and children?
Well, actually, the reality is that it doesn't matter how much you have. You really end up with nothing at the end of it.
Sure, but who the hell is marching with guns and shooting crazy in the street?
There's only a few people, okay, who are publicly doing that. The big thing that I saw was the lack of the policing, the lack of the,
you know how many women were supposedly raped at the Coliseum?
Now, here's another part about that, and I think this is an interesting conversation to have. Supposedly raped is right. I know people that were there who actually, none of that went down. And there was a huge propaganda machine that was set up in order to create the idea that here are most, 85 to 90% black people at the Coliseum. Now, I'm not saying that some of these things didn't happen, because they did. However, I'm saying that the way that it was presented was that this was a huge disorderly crowd, and that, these people were dangerous, all right? People were calling, okay, now this population in New Orleans is over 65% African American. They were calling people refugees, all right? When you're a refugee, that means you don't have a country.
Right.
All right? Now, what the hell was that?
The whole problem with that whole thing is it's media coverage. We don't know what happened in certain segments, but we did see a lot of dead bodies. We did see a lot of chaos. I mean, I can go back to the LA riots. When a group of people's pissed off, and there's a lot of people pissed off in this country. It's not just black people. It's not just white people or Hispanics. There's a lot of pissed off people who feel like their futures have been stolen. They've lost their savings. They've lost their homes. And when the chaos and the crap hits the fan, there could be some massive fallout. And how do we...
I agree that there could be some massive fallout, but I am honestly... I'm not only concerned about that, but what I'm concerned about is when you say, okay, that there is a military complex that is going to help take over and bring the country back to its original documentation of the Declaration of Independence, all right? How many of these people are really involved?
Yep.
And because I cannot believe, because it's not logical or reasonable to believe that every single person in the military is going to back this.
Right.
All right? So that means there's going to be splits. Okay? Are we going to be seeing military against military? That's what I'm concerned.
That'd be scary.
Are we going to be...
Well, here's the other thing. We've got a lot of veterans. We have a lot of veterans who are well trained, and it's been written about in the media that Big Brother has said, you got to watch these veterans. They're well trained. They're military men and women, and they've been in combat. They know what it's like. And there are people wondering, what is this country coming to? And other people say, oh, nothing's going to change. But I think that's unrealistic.
I think that the people who have been paying attention know that just because someone's wearing a uniform doesn't mean they have your best interests at heart.
Yeah.
They may have sworn an oath, and I think that there are a great many people, who believe in that oath, whether they be retired military or not. There are a great many good people out there, and that's a very important thing to say. However, how many of you are there, and how can you reasonably think that you are actually going to be able to control what's going to happen if you start taking out the government?
It's just, it's really amazing to even think about all this. This is a conversation you and I can have for a long time. There's a lot of topics we talk about. I know that we're putting this out on YouTube for people to tune into and check out and share their own thoughts. I love the interview. Something does need to be done. I don't believe that anything can be done without the military. I think that is a key element, and the most key. I liked a lot of what I heard, but there are way too many questions. There's way too many open statements, and there are some very, very legitimate concerns that need to be looked at, because I cannot believe, and I think it is completely illogical to think that the entire military will be behind this maneuver, that all of the marshals are going to be behind this maneuver, and that the police are just going to step in line. Well, and here's the other aspect. We've got our military spread thin across the world right now. How many of them are going to be home in a crisis?
The excuse when New Orleans happened, that all the reserves and everything, they were off in the Middle East.
Exactly.
So how is this going to work?
It really is a big question.
Are they going to bring everybody home and then do this? And how's that going to look? Oh, sorry, we have our orders to bring everyone home. Well, guess what? That takes weeks.
Yeah.
In order to enact an order like that. Who's here now?
Well, and Bezmenov said it takes 6 weeks for this crisis stage to go through. Once somebody's got a foothold on control, it's really hard to get them out. And so it's almost like I feel like we have a race to who's going to start the crisis as an active crisis, and then who's going to control it. And So the Drake interview, I would love to hear some more about what's going on. I'm sure people will be offended by anything negative I ever said about David Wilcock. And I want to reiterate again for those people who are massive Wilcock fans, I think he has brought forth important research that was done by others many years ago that was in books gathering dust on shelves, and he put a new face on it, and he's an excellent speaker. But I don't believe in a lot of the hype he puts out there. I think he's an excellent marketer, and I think he's helped a lot of people. But everything he's ever written about, I read about 10, 15, 20 years ago.
And it's important to look at the fact that, just looking at Wilcock with a sense of realism is in no way diminishing somebody's path having used his materials in order to find...
Because he does put truth out there. It's just not stuff he created.
Right, in order to find a more enlightened sense of themselves. And I think that that's all really positive, and I think it's really great. However, having a realistic view of the world is a fine thing to have. Right. And you can still hold on to your spirituality.
Well, that's the scary thing for me.
And still participate in what's really happening.
Thank you. Yes, that's the part that always kind of scares me, is when you get the people who say it's all going to be beautiful in the future, we don't have to worry about anything, and nothing's going to be bad. And it's like, you know what? The reality I look at, the history I look at, the history of Marxism, the millions and millions and millions of people killed by their own countries. A hell of a lot more people were killed by their own governments than were ever killed in wars between two countries. And so it gets really kind of sketchy for me when I hear people like Wilcock who say, this fear about the future and negativity is wrong, and you guys are all wrong, and it's going to be a beautiful future, and the aliens are going to come help us. That kind of, makes me go, I don't want to leave my future in the hands of a bunch of people who I don't even know or read
the truth can be a very ugly thing to look at. However, just like any parent, all right, who is going to say, you know what, the truth is, don't put your hand on the hot stove because you're going to get burned. It's important because that is the basis of love. Being able to, shed light into the darkness is the basis of love. Being able to look at what the truth really is and not shy away from it, and not, close your eyes and pretend it's not there. That's if you do that, and if you walk your life this way, then anything that happens is something that you haven't taken personal responsibility for. And it's important. It's important. And personal responsibility doesn't mean that you have to have the power to go out and change the entire world. Right. It means change your own world.
Right.
And be a
important.
Sovereign, autonomous being that is educated, do the research, look, read the books, look into these things, but don't just read one book and say, I've become enlightened.
Yeah. And here's the other thing. Reading about enlightenment doesn't make you enlightened.
Right. So anyway, so that's my opinion on that one.
Well, it's good. I'm glad we had this chat. I hope we can do some more, and I'm sure people are going to want to make their comments, which, as long as they're polite, I will let stay posted on the channel. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see in an aspect of how much of this is true, and maybe there'll be some more interviews done by Drake, and I don't know if Wilcock will be involved or not, but, who knows?
The fact of the matter is that we are in a world on the brink, and what happens next is seeming very overwhelming, because we have been taught that, what can one person do to change all of this?
Right.
That's a program. That was a teaching mechanism that got put in early, and it started when we were young, and it's in all the schools, it's in all the colleges, it's in everything. And the fact of the matter is that there is a lot that we can do on personal levels, in neighborhood levels.
Well, it's a domino effect. If we act in love instead of fear, we can affect the person next to us who is on the verge, is on the fence between fear and love. And if we show love to them, then hopefully they'll extend that love to the next person. And instead of being in a state of fear, we can be in a state of love and giving. But I don't think you can depend on that to happen worldwide. I think you can only do what you can do where you are.
Well, I would like to also, end this with, I like the idea of the United States regaining back its sovereignty.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think that is a fantastic, great, and wonderful idea. However, I really need to hear more, because I can't just listen to this interview and trust that my best interests and the best interests of my fellow citizens and the people that I love dearly to me are going to be able to feel comfortable sitting back and watch this go down.
Absolutely.
You know, I need more information. There's not enough.
I agree. Well, Chris, thanks a lot. I hope you have a great day and stay safe in New Orleans. Enjoy your time down there. It's a beautiful place.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a good visit, and I wish you the best, and we'll be talking soon, I'm sure.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
Take it easy.
All right, bye.